welcome to the show where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Poe, founder and editor of KevinMD. Rate and review the show at kevinmd.com/rate. Subscribe at kevinmd.com/follow. Today in the show, we have Melissa Hankins. She is a psychiatrist and a physician coach. She wrote the KevinMD article, Will Smith's Slap is a Trauma Response. Melissa, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to this discussion.
So we'll get into your article in a little bit, but first off, just share your story and journey to where you are today.
My journey to medicine came about because my mom, who died when I was 16, she struggled a lot with her own illness. She had lupus, systemic lupus, and we were in a space of really having a lot of financial struggle during that time. She was a single mom. I was the youngest of three, and she had gone on disability for several years before she died. And she was a nurse, and it was something that my 16-year-old self saw, that she was really not heard by the medical establishment. I don't know if that was because of her gender. I don't know if that was because of the socioeconomic status we were in. I would say maybe racially, but she was a white, woman. I'm biracial. And so that didn't really enter my mind at the time. But after she died, that really galvanized my desire to go into medicine and to help people who really, regardless of their socioeconomic status, that they deserved really quality care. And so when I went to medical school, I was convinced, absolutely 100% convinced, I was going to go into internal medicine. If you had told me psychiatry, there was no way. And then I did my psychiatry rotations and I fell in love. I fell in love with psychiatry. And what I loved about it was the fact that people were sharing their most intimate parts of themselves, their minds, their thoughts, their feelings. And that's not something that I experienced in other rotations during medical school. And I thought it was a great gift that they were giving me. And it was also a place where I felt every single emotion. Personally, I experienced the whole gamut.
Sure.
And so I felt alive in psychiatry. And for me, that was it. I was like, okay, that was my choice. And I loved psychiatry. I now actually full-time as a coach and EFT practitioner, and EFT is emotional freedom techniques, or tapping, acupuncture without the needles kind of thing. And that came about. My coaching and EFT work and transition to that came about after my own burnout. My just kind of crash and burn, I feel, in a very real way. And that occurred back in 2012. And prior to that, I kind of knew I wanted to get out of medicine, actually. I became certified as an executive coach. And this was at a time when coaching was really for the corporate sector.
Yeah.
It was unheard of within medicine.
Yeah.
And then it was something that I got certified as an executive coach, and I just kind of sat on it. It didn't propel me in the ways that I wanted at that time. So I continued on with psychiatry. And when my son, who's now 14, when he was 4, I had my major burnout where I was not staying on top of my charting. I was falling way behind. I had really ill patients and an unending panel of patients, like most of us. And it was trying to balance that and trying to balance my home life and trying to be perfect. And I think that's something that as physicians, we strive towards, unfortunately. And perfectionism is a fallacy. And but I was trying my darndest to be perfect and be everything to everyone. And I was being nothing to myself.
Sure.
And it got to the point where one day I felt, it was after the day after my son's 4th birthday, and I thought he would be better off without me. And so I said, that's not so good, especially for a psychiatrist going and treating people around their own, suicidal ideation. And so that day I went and I said, I need to take an immediate medical leave. And I ended up, and my supervisor at the time said, oh, okay, but can you come in and see your patients for the next couple of days? And being the, good physician that I am, I said, yes. I said, yes, of course. And the next day I had the biggest and first major panic attack I've ever had. I couldn't get dressed. I couldn't leave my house. It was horrible. It was really horrible. And I called the administrator and I was sobbing and I said, I couldn't come in. I couldn't come in. And she was like, okay, all right. And that, after I pulled myself together after 20 minutes, I had to get my son to school. I realized it was his last day of ice skating lessons in Montessori. And we went, and no anxiety, no panic. I was fully present. It was the first time that I was actually there for one of his events because I had missed everything because of work.
Sure.
And so that to me really started my journey of taking time for myself. I thought I was going to be out for 2 weeks. I turned out to be out for 10 months and eventually resigned from that position. But I just really started I was doing therapy more intensely. I'd already started prior to that. I did coaching. I was doing EFT work, and all of those, really meditation, all of those things came together to help heal me and help me to deal with my own traumas, if you will, my trauma of being a physician, because there's so much trauma inherent in our work as physicians, our training, our work. So that really kind of started that journey. And I eventually went back to another position, and I started doing some EFT work with some of my patients, and the staff were amazed by how well the patients were doing with this. And they said, can you do that with us? So I started doing some lunch and learns and really helping them with the stress of charting and overwork and lack of resources, and just really helping them to regulate their emotions and their physical bodies and their thoughts, and bringing in this mindfulness piece, which EFT really does. And it was really a beautiful thing. They started asking me, well, can I work with you one-on-one? And so that really kind of started the coaching EFT business, and it just kind of grew from there.
Well, it's a wonderful story. We probably have to do another episode talking specifically about your coaching and EFT. Absolutely. I would love to hear more about that.
Yes.
But there were some issues about trauma you observed from the recent flap from Will Smith during the Oscars, and you wrote about that in your KevinMD article. Very well received, over 13,000 shares as of today. It's titled, Will Smith's Slap is a Trauma Response. Now, for those that didn't get a chance to read your article, you just walk my audience through it and share the story of why you decided to write it.
Yes, absolutely. It actually started as a Facebook post. And actually one of my EFT colleagues had written a little post on his Facebook wall about the slap, and I thought, wow, okay, something clicked with me. He mentioned trauma in it, trauma response, but didn't really explain much about it. And I saw it and I said, oh my gosh, yes, physicians need to hear more about this, because my whole point in writing my post was actually to educate physicians more about trauma and how it can show up for us as physicians in the subtle ways that we don't often think about. The perfectionism, the workaholism, things like that I mentioned in the article. But this was just such a slap heard around the world
Yeah.
kind of thing, that everybody was aware of it. And so to use that as a really common example that everybody knew about to talk about trauma, it was just perfect timing. And so to then kind of go into a discussion of how trauma can be experienced and how it can manifest in our adult lives.
Yeah, so go more into more detail in terms of that intersection. How did trauma, I guess, in Will Smith's case, how did past trauma potentially lead to his reaction during the Oscars?
Yes. So, with Will Smith, he was in his autobiography, Will,
Hmm.
he had written about an experience when he was 9 years old of watching his father beat his mother, in front of him to the point where she was bloodied. And it was just really horrific for him. And he wanted to really be able to protect her and stand up to his father, but he was this 9-year-old child, of course, and he, but that, of course, stayed with him, and he was bringing that drive, if you will,
Hmm.
similar to my trauma around my mother's death and that propelling me in my work. This was something that propelled him in his work and his achievements and everything that he did. He talked about he was really doing it for his mother, to make his mother proud, to be this person that he couldn't be then. And so when things happened with the slap with Chris Rock, who absolutely has his own trauma history
Hmm.
that we know about. And yes, I didn't discuss it in the article. However, it absolutely is relevant because he had his own response that was not aggressive, but
Hmm.
more of an avoidant kind of either, flight or freeze response.
Yeah.
But for Will, he's hearing this disparaging of his wife by Chris Rock, and it's very likely. Did I examine him? No. Can I say for certain? No. However, given the background information, it's very plausible that his reaction was a traumatic response,
Mm.
where he saw the woman he loved being bullied, and it triggered something in his mind, in his amygdala and hippocampus, where
Hmm.
we hold memories and emotions, and brought him back to that 9-year-old self. And now he was an adult. Now he could actually do something. He didn't have that fear of that 9-year-old self holding him back. And he reacted. He protected the woman that he couldn't protect then as a
Hmm.
9-year-old.
Now, through your lens as a psychiatrist, was there anything that Will Smith could have done to address this or treat this before it came to a head during the Oscars?
Oh, absolutely. And for anybody who's experienced trauma, it's very important to work with a trauma-informed psychiatrist, therapist, a practitioner of some sort who can help you work through the trauma. And with trauma, it's very important to understand that it's what you're experiencing is not simply held in our prefrontal cortex. So the part of our brain at the front of our heads there that are responsible for cognition and our cognitive thinking, that our trauma responses are really based in survival.
Hmm.
And that is a different part of our brains. And so traditional psychotherapy does not really access that. Things like EMDR, eye motion desensitization reprogramming, that is a subspecialty of some therapists. That is a good modality for being able to work with trauma. Different somatic therapies can be helpful, or somatic modalities can be helpful that incorporate the brain, because we hold our emotions in our bodies as well. And when we are traumatized, we have almost a muscle memory of however we were trying to respond in that moment. And with trauma, we're not able to execute that physical response. And so the kind of modalities that are really helpful, and that, you know, I'm hoping at this point that Will Smith is engaging in, are things that would involve a mind, body, emotion kind of combination.
So you mentioned that there are some lessons here that you want clinicians to learn from. So what are some specific things that my clinician audience who may be listening to you here, what are some lessons they can draw from this whole event with Will Smith?
Yeah, you know, that we are human beings, that we are emotional beings, that as physicians especially, we are taught and trained to suppress our emotions. And therefore we're taught and trained to suppress part of our humanity. And that is going to come out one way or another. It's going to come out in either a kind of more physical, aggressive way, maybe yelling at other staff or yelling at your family members, or it may come out in ways of trying to hide and be invisible, be perfect, be people pleasing. So a lot of the overworking these things to try not to draw attention to yourself, that to be aware of those things when you are noticing patterns of behavior for yourself that have become problematic, that you're wanting to change, but that you're having a difficult time changing, there's likely some trauma that's holding it in place.
We're talking to Melissa Hankins. She is a psychiatrist and a physician coach. She wrote the KevinMD article, Will Smith's Slap is a Trauma Response. Melissa, what are some of your take-home messages that you want to leave with the KevinMD audience?
Yes, absolutely. It's very important to engage in your own self-care and become self-aware that you are a human being who is deserving of care, deserving of treatment. If you need that, seek that out. That I know we're, as physicians, we're told and often punished for seeking out treatment. But that is something that, regardless of the idea or fear around punishment, around your licensure or anything like that, if you're not alive or around to be able, because oftentimes when we suppress things, it can get to the point of feeling suicidal. And we know that with physicians, that if you're not around, then it doesn't matter what happens with your license. So take care of yourselves and seek out the support that you need.
Melissa, thank you so much for sharing your time and insight. Thanks again for being on the show.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for having me.